Rachel Millman says, they both failed to mention how this actually works, which is steroids. Rachel, I'm not going to get into the medical science of it. Let me just tell you something. Increased levels of testosterone is just a cross I have to bear. Some men just have elevated levels of testosterone. And I would say, if you look at Kumail and if you look at me, you'd be like, well, sure, those two guys must have elevated levels of testosterone naturally because they're just, you know, alpha dog monsters.
So I wake up the other day and see that actor Kumail Nanjiani is trending on Twitter due to a picture of him that many were poking fun at, particularly in regard to his recent body transformation. For those who don't know, after Kumail was cast in Marvel's upcoming Eternals, he decided to get in shape for the role, his initial physique reveal occurring in December of 2019, going from this to this in about the span of a year. A lot of people on Twitter came to Kumail's defense, saying that other actors such as Chris Evans, Chris Pratt, Chris Hemsworth, Zac Efron, Tom Hardy, and Christian Bale have also undergone similar body transformations and have been praised, while Kumail was criticized, with many claiming he must have taken steroids to achieve his physique, which in turn resulted in many saying that there was a racial double standard at play. I can't speak to the motivations of said Twitter users, but what frustrated me was that I'd argue that the deeper, more intrinsic problem present in the entertainment industry when it comes to male body transformations was left unaddressed. And thus, this video will discuss Hollywood leading men undergoing body transformations, diving a bit deeper into the whole steroid controversy in relation to these transformations, and male body representation and positivity in the media in general, and discuss what I would argue is a growing problem in the industry that isn't being discussed. We are going to start by diving into the many "did X take steroids" controversies, and so I want to give you a rundown of the actual process of getting fit, drawing from my own experience in lifting and bodybuilding, whether that be building muscle, losing fat, or both. As in my experience, a lot of people have a number of misconceptions in regard to getting fit, and it is important to clear some of them up before discussing possible steroid use in the entertainment industry. Obviously, this is going to be quite simplified, but it's just to give you a general idea. Let's say you're a rather skinny guy who wants to have a body like Thor, so you pick a basic lifting routine and hit the gym. But what is actually happening during this process? Big misconception number one. You actually aren't building muscle in the gym itself, but rather tearing your muscles down, damaging your muscle fibers. It is your body repairing these fibers that results in muscle growth. This is where food and sleep come in. Food is used by your body to build your muscles back up in conjunction with enough sleep to allow this process to occur. And this leads us to one of the other big misconceptions about lifting. Some would think, well, if I spend twice as much time in the gym, I will build twice as much muscle. Not necessarily. If you spend too much time in the gym, your muscles won't be able to repair themselves. In the case of lifting, more is not always better. However, there is another hurdle to overcome when trying to get fit, namely balancing one's nutrition. Not only is it vital to eat the right kinds of food, but a very specific amount of food, enough to allow your body to rebuild your muscles, but not too much that your body begins accumulating fat. In order to build muscle, you need to eat enough to not only keep your body functional, but to rebuild your damaged muscle fibers, as well as compensate for the calories you burned while exercising. This is called eating in a calorie surplus. But in order to lose fat and get ripped, you need to eat at a calorie deficit, which means you expend more calories than you take in, so your body burns your excess fat. When most guys think of that Hollywood body they desire, they not only want good muscularity, but also low enough body fat to have bulging shoulders and a visible six-pack. But how can you build muscle while simultaneously losing fat? Well, you can't. I mean, you technically can, but that is usually dependent on a number of other factors, such as genetics, hormones, etc. If a person has a higher body fat percentage, this is usually possible, as the person's body will pull from their excessive fat stores to compensate. This is called body recomposition. But again, this is usually only the case for people who have higher levels of body fat. As one's body fat percentage gets lower and lower, this becomes more and more difficult. It may be possible for some, but it most likely would take a very long time. In some cases, months upon months, if not years, of maintaining an insanely strict diet and exercise routine. Most bodybuilders opt for a bulk cut cycle. which is where they bulk up, aka eat a shit ton, putting on both muscle and fat for a portion of the year, and then cut, aka reduce their caloric intake while trying to maintain as much muscle as possible, even though they are bound to lose some. Bodybuilders usually do this strategically for competitions. Maintaining a ripped, muscular physique year-round is something most, even those who do utilize steroids, cannot physically do. So with all of that being understood, let's move on to Now, I am sure that you have heard, in regard to every single male actor I have listed so far, steroids being thrown out as the method they used to achieve their body transformation. And I am sure you have heard many retorting to these accusations by saying their transformations are completely possible without steroids, and it's not okay to accuse with no proof. However, many people have a limited understanding of what others mean when they say steroids. When most people hear steroids, they probably think of absurdly muscular men with bulging stomachs and veins popping out. But these are the extremes. You can take steroids and have a reasonably natural looking body. Just because your physique looks like it could have been achieved naturally doesn't mean it was. Going back, the process of getting fit is a balance of exercise, eating, and sleeping. Work, fuel, recovery. Steroids in this context may be used as a blanket term to encapsulate any substance that aids people in one of these three areas. A better term to use is not to say someone is on steroids, but that they utilize PEDs, performance-enhancing drugs, or that they are unnatural. So for example, someone may take a substance specifically designed to help in the muscle building process, such as HGH. Then there are substances that help you shed fat while retaining your muscularity, such as clenbuterol, a compound used to help people with breathing disorders, but has been utilized particularly in the bodybuilding community due to its ability to increase a person's metabolic rate, allowing them to shed fat like crazy without losing as much muscle as they normally would. Then there are substances, such as prednisone, that are designed to help with recovery, lowering inflammation of the body and allowing you to train harder and longer. Also note, it is quite common for PED users to take multiple substances of varying kinds in conjunction with one another, something that is often referred to as stacking. So when someone says a particular person achieved their body transformation by unnatural means, they don't necessarily mean growth hormone specifically, but also other substances that allow them to get down to a low body fat percentage while keeping their muscularity, and/or recover faster and train harder. But this of course leads to a problem. Obviously, most actors would never admit to taking PEDs due to public perception. They may even be contractually obliged not to, even if they wanted to. So how is it that we could ever determine if an actor did take performance-enhancing drugs? So what are some signs we can look out for to determine if someone may be utilizing PEDs? In some cases, there are more obvious physical signs, such as gynecomastia or hair loss. But the big things to look out for aside from these are the extent of the transformation versus how long it took to achieve, the volume/intensity of the workout routine/regimen, and how long someone is able to maintain their physique. The first one is the big one. In most of the transformations we see, most of them are achievable naturally, but it is about how long it takes them to get there. For example, Chris Pratt was said to have lost 60 pounds in 6 months for his role in Guardians of the Galaxy. While this is quite extreme, it isn't out of the realm of possibility naturally. Chris averaged a loss of 2.5 pounds per week, which is possible, especially since Chris was quite overweight when he began. But then there are others that may be a bit suspect. It was reported that Bradley Cooper gained 40 pounds of muscle over the course of 10 weeks for his role as Chris Kyle in American Sniper. Now, this was most likely inaccurate. He probably put on 40 pounds overall, not just straight up muscle. That'd be fucking absurd. But in any case, even if it was, say, 15 to 20 pounds of muscle, him doing so in that time period may still raise a few eyebrows, especially at the age of 40. Christian Bale's infamous bump up from his physique in The Machinist to his physique in Batman Begins in the span of 6 months is another that is quite suspect. Now, there is something to be said about muscle memory, which is if you have previously had decent muscularity and then stopped training, it is easier to pack the muscle back on as opposed to someone who has never lifted before. But even still, It is quite hard to believe, especially given Bale's multiple transformations over the course of his career. How his metabolism isn't completely dysfunctional by this point is a mystery. Again, it isn't that these body transformations are impossible to achieve naturally, it's how quickly they occur, and in most cases, particularly how actors are able to remain so lean while doing so. Now, some of you may be saying that these actors are millionaires that are paid even more millions to do this, and have access to the best trainers, dietitians, and resources in the world, which is true, but also consider that when people talk about these stars training, it's as if they literally do nothing else for months on end, without taking into account other commitments. Whether it is rehearsals, press tours, other projects, it isn't likely that they just become solitary gym rats who literally do nothing else but stick to their workout plan. And then there are the workout plans. I have tried to be somewhat measured up until this point, but let me step away from that for just a hot second and say that many celebrity trainers you may hear or read about who get stars into shape are complete fucking clowns. I know that is harsh, but one only has to look at some of the workout plans found online that supposedly were used by stars to see what I am talking about. Almost anyone who has an intermediate understanding of lifting can take one look at these plans and see how absurd some of them are, filled with pointless, redundant work, the volume and frequency often being absolutely insane, with some of these workouts looking as if they take hours to complete. That is another huge red flag. How long and often these stars work out. Some actors say they work out 5 to 6, sometimes 7 days a week, 3 to 4 to 5 hours a day, sometimes even more. This is absurd. To go back to the previous section, your body needs time to recover. At some point, working out too much will just make you depleted to such an extent that no matter how much you eat and sleep, it becomes impossible to catch up, let alone increasing the risk of injury by a tremendous amount. Maybe the actors themselves are overselling it, or the workout plans you find online are exaggerated, all to create a glamorized image of celebrities working hard for a role. But even so, putting this ridiculous shit out there that newbies who don't know any better end up following is irresponsible in and of itself. And then there is how long these actors remain in shape. Consider that film productions can last months, requiring actors to not only get in shape, but stay in shape for a long time. For example, the production of Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame, which were shot back to back, lasted from January 2018 to January 2019, requiring certain actors to remain in shape for the entirety of this time, perhaps even longer when you take into account possible reshoots. That is all on top of the pressure Hollywood stars are most likely dealing with when it comes to just staying in shape in general, whether it's maintaining an image for the paparazzi, press tours, convention appearances, etc. Okay, but again, none of this is proof. Unless we have solid proof of any of these actors using performance-enhancing drugs or other substances to aid in their body transformations, it is best to not even suggest they may be doing so, right? Well, maybe, but I'd just like you to all keep in mind, as we continue to discuss this, that in 2012, competitive cyclist and 7-time Tour de France champion Lance Armstrong was stripped of his titles and banned for life from the sport due to accusations of him utilizing PEDs throughout his career, something he ended up admitting to the following year to Oprah Winfrey in a now infamous television interview. Many expressed their dismay at how Lance betrayed the trust of so many, how he robbed his competitors of their glory. You know, those competitors, the vast majority of whom were either confirmed or strongly suspected of also using PEDs during the time Armstrong competed. I always roll my eyes whenever a PED or steroid scandal breaks and the higher-ups of a particular industry lose their ever-loving shit and say how disgraceful it is, because the sad and honest truth is that PEDs are rampant throughout pretty much every level of almost every professional sport. But wait, these industries drug test athletes, and statistics show only a low percentage of them test positive, which is true, but most of this is a hilarious pony show. The process of random drug testing is incredibly flawed and is constantly trying to catch up with burgeoning technology and pharmaceutical advancements. Consider the resources athletes have access to, substances that the vast majority of the public have never even heard of, that can be developed to successfully pass most drug tests. If you ask the NFL what percentage of players are using PEDs, you may get the standard line of them being outliers or extreme rarities. When you ask ex-players, people who are actually on the ground and in the locker rooms, you get obscene estimates of players using some sort of performance-enhancing substance. We may all remember Barry Bonds or Mark McGwire and their steroid scandals breaking huge news, but in retrospect, It seems rather overblown when you consider multiple ex-players have given estimates of 20 to 40% of players using PEDs. Same deal in the NBA. When you ask the players who are actually on the ground, you get a significantly different story than what the organizations may tell you or what the public may assume. But the biggest reason these issues are so hush-hush, because most people, both those involved in the organizations and those who watch the sports, frankly, do you really think the higher-ups of the NFL, MLB, or NBA care that professional athletes take PEDs to better their performance when doing so only raises their prospects of being multi-million-dollar assets?
Those guys who run that filthy sport who is sitting there going like, oh, this is ridiculous. He doesn't represent cycling. Are they going to return all the money that they made off of that guy? Huh? They're going to turn in their yachts? They're not going to turn in their...
Do you think most NFL watchers are really all that upset that some of their favorite athletes abuse HGH to perform better, when evidence of rampant CTE, a degenerative brain disease developed as a result of continuous head trauma, has been around for years? I am pretty sure more NFL fans said they would boycott the organization after Kaepernick kneeled during the national anthem than they did after learning of the extent of CTE symptoms in the pro, college, and even high school levels. Yeah, but that is in professional sports. I mean, these athletes are put under high demand to perform and need to compete with all the other athletes. What does this have to do with Hollywood? It's not like PEDs or other controlled substances are or have been proven to have been purchased or used by beloved male stars and notable figures like The Rock, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Charlie Sheen, Mickey Rourke, Sylvester Stallone, Nick Nolte, 50 Cent, and Tyler Perry? What I find so strange about many getting defensive of the insinuation that PEDs are utilized by some of our favorite stars is that it's not like these same people are in denial of all the other seedy and fucked up shit that is present in the entertainment industry. Rampant sexual assault, recreational drug abuse, exploitation and coercion. Would it really be that much of a stretch of the imagination that leading men use certain substances to achieve their results? Again, once you expand your understanding of what someone may mean when they say PEDs, it really isn't all that much of a leap. Earlier, I spoke of clenbuterol being huge in the bodybuilding community, as it allows for hyper fat loss. Well, it is also quite popular in Hollywood, notably for a number of high-profile female stars, fat burners, amphetamines, opioids, all having been shown to be rampant in the entertainment industry, to stay looking good, manage long hours, to get the job done. Why would some TRT be any different?
Kinds of drugs that they'll give you, like they'll give you steroids if it's really bad.
Now, you might not want to tell everybody you're doing these steroids because now you might get excommunicated from the competition.
No, trust me, I promise you, every famous singer you know has had to take some prednisone every once in a while.
Really?
I promise you.
What?
I promise you, every singer has had rough times, and occasionally your doctor will say, I need to give you some prednisone.
All these years.
PED crisis in music at the Grammys.
What irked me so much about the Kumail Nanjiani example was that, again, I understand those defending him were doing so with to some extent good intentions, but the deeper problem went over their heads. Many seemed to defend him by saying other stars didn't get the same flack, ignoring the more insidious problem that this conversation is simply a symptom of. We have discussed at great length the pressure the industry puts on women to conform to particular beauty standards, with Lord knows how many examples of it leading to serious or deadly results. But are we able to have that same conversation with men without it coming off as body shaming or jealousy? How can we even begin to have this conversation if everyone involved, from the actors to the producers, fans, etc., have no incentive, and again, in some cases are even prohibited to discuss it? A greater irony is that while PED and substance use in Hollywood seems to be far less acknowledged than it is in sports, there is actually nothing wrong with it on a moral or ethical level. I don't think most people care what a grown adult puts in their own body. The reason it is frowned upon in sports is that it constitutes cheating, as they are in a competition, and taking PEDs gives an unfair edge, though that is assuming everyone else isn't also taking them. But when it comes to Hollywood, who gives a shit? If Chris Evans came out tomorrow and said, yeah, I took some tests and cleansed to get my Captain American body, I'm an actor. That is what the role required. I have enough money to hire doctors to watch my ass 24/7 and make sure I don't hurt myself. Would anyone actually be appalled enough to not enjoy his movies? Now, of course, Disney ain't gonna let anyone do that, considering their family-friendly image and the obscenely strict contracts they make all their stars sign. But even so, wouldn't it be bad to have stars be candid about it, as it would risk promoting steroids or other PEDs to younger audiences? Well, maybe, But is it all that much worse than potentially lying about PED or substance use for muscle gain or weight loss, preaching hard work and determination, while others shut down those who question their results as haters, having absurd training programs and regimens freely available online that most people can't feasibly handle without burning out within a week? Or what about promoting just as, if not far more, unhealthy and dangerous habits? I always scratch my head when those who say Hugh Jackman has never done PEDs explain that the reason his skin looked like saran wrap while portraying Wolverine is because he didn't drink water for 36 hours before certain scenes, dehydrating himself to an obscenely dangerous extent, thus giving him his ripped look. Like, I guess that's better? Where is the line where we say actors doing something like this is dedication or dangerously irresponsible? Would you say a runway model eating a handful of spinach a day for 3 months to get down to a size 0 for an upcoming show should be praised for her dedication to her craft? There is almost a part of me that thinks having actors and athletes be completely and utterly open about all of this would just be better. Would it risk promoting roids and PEDs and other stuff like that to people? Maybe, but isn't this already happening? Kids aspire to be actors or athletes or models, and then down the line realize the dangerous lengths they may have to take. At the very least, if everyone was open about it, wouldn't this give a more realistic, no BS picture of what it takes to make it in certain industries or professions? Wouldn't it maybe make the seediness behind the whole thing less destructive, and hell, maybe God forbid, lead to change? Full disclosure, I can't say I have a grand solution for this problem. My frustration with this whole debacle comes primarily from my experience with the lifting bodybuilding scene, particularly on YouTube, where there are countless grifters using anything under the sun to keep them bulk and lean in order to keep the cash flow coming in, all the while lying about it, preaching hard work, discipline, and perseverance to impressionable kids whom they convince to buy their obscenely overpriced workout plans and supplements, promising they can look like them naturally if they just work hard enough, which they can't, resulting in these kids getting incredibly down on themselves, with many ending up doing junk anyway to measure up. The problem is, unless a particular bodybuilder is demonstrably proven to be on PEDs, the vast majority of the fandom can't call them on it, and the problem goes unaddressed. This is in part why rampant steroid and substance use in the industry continues to this day. To some extent, I think my fear is that I see something similar happening when it comes to male body images in the media, with those who may call attention to the more unrealistic expectations of what young men are shown on the big screen being met with accusations of jealousy and downplaying determination and work ethic. But I am not doing that at all. PEDs aren't a miracle solution. You still need to put the time in, and the actors themselves still work their asses off. But in an industry that has proven time and time again that any attempt to break the status quo is met with vicious resistance, my fear is that men who want to break into the industry will do whatever it takes to do so, regardless of the harm it may bring them. There are some that are trying to break the status quo even within the industry itself. Rob McElhaney, having undergone a body transformation for It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, constantly makes sure to stress that it is not something that is even remotely realistic for your average Joe, as did Kumail in his original body reveal post on Instagram. Then there is Robert Pattinson, who was quoted saying he refused to work out to an insane degree for his upcoming role as Bruce Wayne, stating, "I think if you're working out all the time, you're part of the problem. You set a precedent. Check out my fucking zaddy boy challenging current male beauty standards. Fucking king." I think these guys, and many others, are doing something important by stressing that, PEDs or no, their workout routines and dietary regimens and their final results are not something the average guy should consider realistic, and or trying to break the mold and expectations that leading men need to look a certain way, as it can have negative effects on the young men who idolize them. Hopefully, we will see more of this in the future. So ultimately, while given my experience and the nature of the industry, I strongly suspect it, I can't say for sure if any of Hollywood's leading men are utilizing PEDs to attain their physiques. However, I fear this is a conversation that may never go beyond internet arguments or accusations, as, like in sports, it is something that those involved in the industry and even the viewing public may not be eager to try and uncover. And to expand on that idea, I want to leave you with a final thought. While this video was primarily focused around discussing the more artificial side of Hollywood and the sports world, to sort of try and give a more realistic view as to what is truly going on behind the scenes, I also want to discuss how this sort of stuff can actually affect not only the young men who look up to these megastars, but the stars themselves, and how we as the viewing public may in some cases inadvertently be perpetuating the problem. What disgusted me the most was that of the two sides of the issue, those who were poking fun at Kumail's appearance and those who were defending him by saying they were either being jealous or hypocritical, no one actually seemed to ask if Kumail himself was good. Kumail is a grown man and he can do as he pleases, but this doesn't mean he and other male stars we look up to don't feel pressure to look a certain way. Again, we have fully accepted this is a reality for female stars, but for some reason, when it comes to men, the discussion is still in its infancy. To go back to the example regarding the NFL and CTE, what is so sad about the whole situation is that despite the horrific effects the condition has on so many players, and the fact that so many of these athletes most likely feel pressured to take PEDs to be able to compete, no one really gives a shit about them. Both those in leadership positions and many of those admiring these athletes from the stands don't really seem all that concerned with their safety and health. Again, this research has been around for years, and yet not much has changed. To the bigwigs, they are simply million-dollar assets. To those in the stands, they are sources of entertainment, and anything that gets in the way of that is to be ignored. So is part of the reason the apparent rampant use of steroids and PEDs in the NFL and other major league sports that no one wants to break the illusion, if you will? And to some extent, I think this is in part what leads to a deeper problem in regard to male body representation in Hollywood. These men are simply multi-million-dollar assets to the bigwigs in Hollywood. Do we really think most of them care if an actor is put under an enormous amount of pressure to look a certain way when doing so only rakes in more bucks for the studios? Is part of the reason most discussion surrounding PED use by Hollywood stars is often squashed before it even begins, partially due to the public wanting to maintain their image of certain male celebrities as upstanding, pure, and wholesome dudes? Again, seems odd, as I'd say there is nothing unethical or immoral about taking PEDs in and of itself. However, consider this. Let's forget all of what I just went over, and let's say that every single star in Hollywood is completely natural, and every body transformation we see was simply a product of hard work, determination, extreme exercise and weight loss, dehydration, etc. Let's say that PEDs or steroids were not involved at all. But now the question is, are we left with anything better? When we hear of the methods these actors utilize to transform their bodies, and we praise them for their hard work, determination, and discipline, the question is, should we? We often are in awe of them, but are we actually listening and taking into account how these dudes actually may be feeling during this process? These actors may be dedicated to their craft and want to have a certain body image for a particular role, but is there also a level of outside pressure they feel to do so? And should that be a conversation we should be having, especially when it comes to men, as I feel this conversation is often had a lot more often in relation to women. When we see stick-thin runway models, or say an actress lose a ton of weight, while we may not immediately jump to brand them as bulimic or anorexic, there is always a conscious conversation of whether or not there may be auxiliary pressure in the industry, making many women feel as though they need to do this in order to stay relevant and be successful. And if they refuse, there is always a mile-long line of other women to take their place. This is especially true for newcomers to the industry. But I'd argue we hardly have this conversation when it comes to men, and again, especially young up-and-comers. Many male stars have stated flat out the stress and pressure and anxiety they face in terms of maintaining a certain body image.
Is there a lot of pressure to keep up?
Yeah, the answer is yes. So, you want to make sure that you do your best to at least get close to the idea that some of these comic book fans have in their head.
You got to be, audiences expect you to look like a superhero now.
For the first shirtless scene, I definitely did some unhealthy crash dieting. And being in TV long enough, I'll tell you this is something that almost all actors and actresses do for these shirtless scenes.
But for some reason, it seems like it isn't as seen as much of a toxic cultural aspect of the industry as it is for women. For a lot of people, these omissions fall on deaf ears, particularly for those who see these men as objects or props as opposed to actual human beings. Like with, say, NFL players, I think there is a certain percentage of the viewing public that wants to maintain a certain image of their favorite Hollywood leading man, and any talk of the more insidious side of the industry in relation to this is met with hostility. Robert Pattinson stating he wasn't working out for his Batman role, believing doing so may only perpetuate unhealthy and unrealistic body standards for men. I am sure such a statement wasn't met with absurd gatekeeping furor, right?
Pick up a fucking dumbbell. Some rich, privileged asshole, and you can't be bothered to pick up a fucking dumbbell. You're not committed. You don't respect this character. You don't respect the fans.
Being a slack ass, being a loser, being a weak noodle, being a wet noodle, getting on some So you think that's sending the right message? All that's doing is making you look like a joke.
I mean, look at a real actor like Christian Bale. Go look at how he looks in that movie, The Machinist. You know, and then compare how he looks in the Batman movies. Okay, that's a real actor. This whiny wuss.
Pattinson and Bruce Wayne are like different entities, right? If you're working out all of the time, you're a part of the problem. Dude, what? Have you seen the physical transformations that a lot of the MCU actors went through? They created a culture.
And that's not even getting into how this relates to how often leading men are ogled, drooled over, objectified, and in some cases straight up borderline sexually assaulted, in some cases on national television. And again, it isn't seen as anything all that bad.
Are you carbo loading? Because
Someone was just touching my butt. I don't know. Oh, sorry.
Do not touch his butt.
Oh, it's Katy Perry was touching my butt.
That's okay.
Backstage, McCarthy joked about what Bieber jokingly called violating.
I did grab his butt. I'm single, but I think that's cougar rape.
My main point with this video was not to expose your favorite Hollywood leading man as an HGH junkie or anything like that. Simply to express that I fear, in some cases, we as the viewing public may at times, whether it is due to our own desire to uphold a certain view or image of a particular star or the industry itself, avoid taking a harder, more critical look at what I'd say are clearly problematic aspects of the culture. And I fear that if it is something that we don't discuss, it will simply become worse and worse as time goes on. Maybe the actors we have spoken about thus far commit to these body transformations wholly for themselves, but will it eventually lead to it becoming a borderline requirement in the future? Just like, say, a certain body image was basically required in the female modeling industry, something that is slowly being chipped away at, slowly being the key word. In terms of male actor body transformations, whether we praise them for their dedication or lambast them, accusing them of being roid heads, the question as to whether or not our lack of discussing the pressure many actors may feel to undergo them is in part overlooking and even adding to a culture where this is expected of leading men, despite the turmoil, pain, and stress it may result in for them, which in turn perpetuates a particular body image that leads to young men considering this image as the ideal, something they want to see and celebrate, which in turn lead to that image being perpetuated even more in the entertainment industry. A vicious cycle that won't stop until we start being able to confront and discuss it. Something I hope we will be able to get better at doing in the future.